Imagine standing in front of a machine that seems almost alive, its frame taut, its stance aggressive, its purpose written in every angle of its silhouette. This isn't just another product of engineering. It's a statement about how far technology can be pushed when compromise is left behind. The thrill isn't simply in the speed or the numbers on paper, but in the raw feeling of being connected to something so precise, so unapologetically focused, that it challenges the rider or driver to rise to its level. In an era where refinement often smooths over the edges, there are rare moments when a manufacturer decides to build something sharp and unfiltered, a creation that prioritizes extremes rather than middle ground. That decision, risky, brave, and maybe even reckless, is what turns a machine into a legend. Today we're diving into one of those moments when the pursuit of absolute performance created something unforgettable. Stick around, and if you enjoy this journey through speed, design, and consequence, be sure to like, subscribe, and comment what story we should uncover next. The Kawasaki ZX-10R 2004 burst onto the scene with an intensity that felt almost out of step with the expectations of its time. In just a few short years, the leader bike category had gone from being a prestige class of motorcycles to becoming a battlefield where every manufacturer sought to claim the crown of speed and dominance. Kawasaki, often seen as the brand playing catch-up after its older leader class machines had struggled to make a lasting mark, suddenly swung for the fences with the ZX-10R. This was not an incremental update, not a careful evolution. It was a radical reset that aimed to place Kawasaki at the very front of the superbike wars. To understand why this 2004 model mattered, we have to step back and examine what was happening inside Kawasaki's development halls at the turn of the millennium. The late 1990s and early 2000s were years of explosive growth in sport bike culture, especially in the United States, where riders wanted the biggest numbers, the sharpest handling, and the reputation of riding something that demanded respect. The ZX-9R, Kawasaki's leader class entry before the 10R, had been fast and capable, but by the early 2000s, it was no longer seen as the fire-breathing king of the hill. It was heavy compared to its rivals, and its focus leaned more toward real-world usability than razor's-edge track domination. Engineers inside Kawasaki knew this had to change. Their mandate was simple: leapfrog the competition by delivering the most aggressive, most uncompromising leader bike on the market. But there was a cost to that decision, and it would shape the ZX-10R's reputation for years to come. To make the Kawasaki ZX-10R 2004 stand apart, the design team put weight savings above almost everything else. The bike tipped the scales at just over 375 pounds dry, lighter than many 600cc sport bikes of the era. Combine that featherweight build with a 998cc inline-4 engine, producing nearly 180 horsepower at the crank, and you had a power-to-weight ratio that made seasoned riders pause. It wasn't just quick in a straight line, it was violent in how fast it reached speed, demanding total focus from whoever sat on its saddle. The frame was all new, built to be compact, stiff, and responsive, paired with steep steering geometry that delivered lightning-quick changes of direction. The message was clear: this was not a bike for the timid. Kawasaki knew their target audience: the riders who wanted to feel like they were taming a beast rather than riding a polished tool. And yet the ZX-10R wasn't simply reckless design. Every choice had a logic. The compact dimensions gave it a racing edge. The aerodynamic profile minimized drag at triple-digit speeds. And the minimalist approach to electronics kept weight low while putting full responsibility in the rider's hands. No traction control, no ABS, no electronic crutches, just raw power and mechanical precision. For those who had the skill, the payoff was exhilarating. For those who didn't, the consequences could be intimidating. The styling reflected this mission. Angular, sharp, almost predatory, the Kawasaki ZX-10R 2004 looked like it was always in motion, even at a standstill. Unlike some rivals that aimed for curvaceous lines or futuristic flair, Kawasaki's designers made the ZX-10R appear aggressive, functional, and focused. Owners described the bike as one that seemed to dare you before you even started the engine. But what's fascinating about this machine is not only how it was designed, but also why Kawasaki chose this exact moment to unleash it. The early 2000s were a time when riders in the US were growing bolder, inspired by a culture of speed and a fascination with motorcycles that could outperform exotic cars on the road or track. Insurance rates were climbing, safety groups were voicing concern, and yet the hunger for faster, lighter, more extreme bikes only intensified. The ZX-10R 2004 wasn't built to calm those waters, it was built to stir them. Riders who bought one knew they weren't choosing comfort or convenience. The ergonomics were aggressive, the seat high and narrow, the suspension stiff, and the riding experience unforgiving. It wasn't built to commute, it was built to thrill. Kawasaki engineers accepted that trade-off. They weren't trying to build a machine that appealed to everyone. They were building something that reminded the world that Kawasaki could still take risks and deliver an icon. And in that gamble, they also revived their reputation among riders who wanted a bike that didn't compromise in the pursuit of performance. Yet this raises a critical question. When a manufacturer builds something this extreme, how does the world react? Was the Kawasaki ZX-10R 2004 celebrated as the champion Kawasaki wanted it to be? Or was it seen as too wild, too dangerous, and too niche for its own good? That is where the story deepens, because the reaction to this leader bike revealed as much about the motorcycle community as it did about Kawasaki itself. The Kawasaki ZX-10R 2004 entered the market with a thunderclap, and the reaction was immediate, polarized, and unforgettable. Enthusiasts and professional reviewers alike were stunned by the sheer aggression Kawasaki had poured into the machine. Many hailed it as the new benchmark of raw performance, while others whispered warnings that it was almost too sharp, too unforgiving for the average rider. In the United States, this divide played out in fascinating ways. On one hand, riders hungry for bragging rights saw the ZX-10R as the ultimate badge of courage. On the other, dealerships and insurers braced for the reality that this motorcycle demanded more than casual skill. Kawasaki had built something uncompromising, and the market knew it. The Kawasaki ZX-10R 2004 wasn't just measured in horsepower or lap times. It was judged by the visceral reactions it pulled out of anyone brave enough to twist its throttle. Magazines of the time called it the wild card of the litter bike segment, praising its incredible power-to-weight ratio, but also cautioning that it had a hair-trigger personality. Riders coming off smoother, more forgiving leader bikes found themselves in awe of its acceleration, but wary of its twitchy handling at the limit. The absence of traction control or rider aids meant that the ZX-10R placed complete responsibility on the rider's shoulders, an exhilarating prospect for veterans, but a terrifying one for those who weren't ready for its demands. This tension between awe and fear became part of its legend. In motorsport, the Kawasaki ZX-10R 2004 was both an opportunity and a challenge. Racers recognized the potential in its chassis and power delivery, but taming it on the track required an almost brutal level of focus. Kawasaki's decision to build a lightweight, uncompromising machine gave privateers and professional teams a weapon that could be devastatingly quick in the right hands, but only if it was set up with precision. Tuners and aftermarket specialists quickly jumped in to soften or sharpen the ZX-10R, depending on rider preference. Suspension upgrades, steering dampers, and fuel management systems became common add-ons, not because the base bike lacked potential, but because riders wanted to harness its ferocity in ways that better matched their own skill sets. In garages across America, owners personalized their ZX-10Rs, not just to stand out, but to survive the experience of riding them at speed. The motorcycle also sparked conversations about the direction of the entire leader bike segment. Some wondered if Kawasaki had gone too far, making a machine that alienated average riders in favor of catering to a small band of thrill seekers. Others argued that the ZX-10R was exactly what the industry needed, a reminder that motorcycles are not appliances, that they are supposed to thrill, intimidate, and demand respect. It was a philosophical debate, and Kawasaki seemed content to sit back and let the machine speak for itself. In the American market, that debate took on an added dimension. Riders in wide-open states with endless highways and access to racetracks saw the ZX-10R as the perfect expression of freedom and performance. But in urban areas where congestion and law enforcement scrutiny were high, the bike was overkill, a machine that few could ever fully exploit. Kawasaki hadn't built it for commuting or cruising. It was a purebred superbike, and its very existence forced potential buyers to ask themselves if they were ready for something so unfiltered. Yet, in spite of its sharp edges, the Kawasaki ZX-10R 2004 found a loyal following. Owners relished the sense that they were part of an elite group, bonded not by comfort or convenience, but by their willingness to ride a machine that pushed boundaries. In the culture of early 2000s motorcycling, when bigger, faster, and bolder ruled the conversation, that mattered. The ZX-10R wasn't just a purchase, it was a declaration. The consequences of that declaration, however, stretched beyond the individual rider. Rivals watched closely. Other manufacturers took note of Kawasaki's gamble, and the ripple effect was undeniable. Within just a few years, the litter bike wars shifted from raw mechanical performance to a new phase that introduced electronics as a way to tame ever-increasing horsepower. Traction control, wheelie control, and later ABS systems became commonplace. Not only because technology made them possible, but because the ZX-10R had shown the industry what happened when power was left unchecked. That shift in strategy, balancing brute force with electronic management, defined the superbikes that followed. The Kawasaki ZX-10R 2004 may not have been the most polished machine of its generation, but it forced an evolution by daring to be extreme. And in that way, its reception wasn't just about sales figures or magazine shootouts, it was about shaping the trajectory of performance motorcycles for the decade ahead. But what about today? 2 decades later, what does the Kawasaki ZX-10R 2004 represent to riders, collectors, and enthusiasts in the modern world of sport bikes? Where electronic rider aids and balance dominate the conversation, that's where the legacy of this fearsome machine comes into focus. The Kawasaki ZX-10R 2004 today stands as a milestone in motorcycling history, a machine remembered not for refinement but for its raw, almost primal character. When you look back at it now, nearly 2 decades later, the first thing that strikes you is how unapologetically focused it was. The ZX-10R wasn't trying to be an all-rounder, wasn't trying to accommodate casual riders. It was designed to be the sharpest tool in the shed. And that identity has carried forward into the way enthusiasts and historians view it. To speak of the Kawasaki ZX-10R 2004 is to speak of a turning point, when the leader bike segment tested just how far it could go without the safety net of electronics. This model sits at the intersection of old school and new school. On one hand, it was the last gasp of a fully mechanical superbike, relying on rider skill rather than computerized intervention. On the other, it became the spark that ignited the race toward integrating rider aids, because it showed how dangerous unchecked performance could be for the masses. Riders who mastered it remember the experience with awe, a sense that they had connected with a motorcycle that tested them in ways few machines ever had. For others, it remains a cautionary tale of what happens when performance leaps faster than most can realistically handle. The legacy of the Kawasaki ZX-10R 2004 is especially vivid when you compare it to today's superbikes. Modern litter bikes boast even higher horsepower figures, but they wrap that power in layers of traction control, cornering ABS, ride modes, and even launch control. These features give everyday riders a chance to sample extreme performance without being constantly on the edge of disaster. And yet, because of this safety net, some argue that no modern machine can replicate the adrenaline that came from riding something like the 2004 ZX-10R. It was the purest form of the leader bike arms race, distilled into a package that didn't apologize for its risks. Collectors and enthusiasts now see it as a piece of history, a reminder of a brief, wild period when manufacturers were willing to throw restraint out the window to see just how fast and light a superbike could be. In the US, used examples of the Kawasaki ZX-10R 2004 have become cult favorites. While later generations brought more power and more sophistication, the first-year model carries a mystique that no update can replace. Riders seek it out not because it's the most refined, but because it embodies a moment in time, when performance was raw, brutal, and completely unfiltered. For some, owning one is a badge of honor. For others, it's a reminder of just how far sport bikes have evolved since those heady days. Ultimately, the Kawasaki ZX-10R 2004 matters not just because of what it was, but because of what it caused. It redefined expectations, pushed rivals to rethink their approach, and cemented Kawasaki's image as a brand willing to take bold risks in pursuit of speed. And while the leader bike wars have since evolved into a blend of performance and control, the legend of the ZX-10R remains intact. A story of controlled chaos, frozen in time. The final takeaway is simple. The Kawasaki ZX-10R 2004 wasn't just another superbike. It was a statement. It proved that sometimes the most important machines aren't the ones that sell the most units or win the most trophies, but the ones that force the entire industry to change direction. And that's why, 2 decades later, this radical litter bike still matters. The Kawasaki ZX-10R 2004 leaves us with a set of lessons that resonate as strongly today as they did when it first launched. For American riders and enthusiasts, the bike represents both a high-water mark of mechanical bravery and a reminder of what it means to tame a machine without safety nets. If you're considering one now, the appeal lies not in practicality but in authenticity. It's a motorcycle that demands respect, preparation, and commitment. Used prices vary depending on condition, but compared to later generations packed with electronics, the 2004 model is often valued for its rawness rather than resale stability. Buyers should approach with caution. Parts availability is reasonable, but clean, unmodified examples are getting harder to find, as many were either crashed, tracked, or heavily customized. Reliability was generally strong for the engine and core components, but the bike's aggressive geometry and minimal rider aids mean wear and tear on suspension and tires is significant. Maintenance records are critical because a poorly maintained example can quickly turn from collectible icon to money pit. Still, for those who understand what they're buying, the Kawasaki ZX-10R 2004 offers something that no modern superbike can fully replicate: a window into an era when engineers prioritized speed and lightness above everything else. It is not a forgiving bike, but that is precisely why it remains iconic. In the US market, its cultural weight is tied to its reputation as a machine that could humble even experienced riders, and that continues to fuel its allure. If you find one, ride it with respect or preserve it as a piece of superbike history. It earns either fate. At its heart, the Kawasaki ZX-10R 2004 is proof that sometimes the boldest decisions leave the deepest marks. And when the story of litter bikes is told, this one will always be remembered as the moment when extreme performance was unleashed without apology. The final word is simple. The Kawasaki ZX-10R 2004 didn't just raise the bar, it redefined it.